Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us, as always, to talk all things markets, University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
We're in the Eastern time zone. I could almost say good evening. We're a little bit later today. Today, we're going to get into, it's been a pretty busy week for reports in general, and we're going to talk supply and demand. We're going to talk trade. But to kick things off for us, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, this week, Megan, if we start on live cattle, they were basically unchanged again this week. We've seen a lot of sideways in terms of fed cattle prices here over the last few weeks. On the feeder cattle side, feeder cattle markets this week were 3 to 5 higher. The August live cattle futures contract was up $2, and the August feeder cattle futures contract was up a little more than $1 this week. On the beef side, the choice box beef price was down slightly this week. While switching to the hog side, barrow and gilt prices this week were up nearly $5.50. The July lean hog futures contract was down 75 cents this week. While we saw strength in the pork cutout value, it was up nearly $4 on the week.
It's been interesting to watch markets this week. It's also been interesting to watch what's going on the slaughter side of things. And it looks like we picked up from our shortened holiday week last week.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at for the week ending June 12th, 665,000 head of cattle to be slaughtered this week. That's 127,000 above a week ago and 20,000 above a year ago. That puts cattle slaughter year to date 5.7% above where we were this time last year. On the hog side, a run of 2.440 million head this week. That's 465,000 more than where we were a week ago, and 24,000 less than where we were a year ago. Hog slaughter year to date is now 1.7% above year ago levels.
We keep dropping little by little above where we were from the year prior. Do we anticipate that just to kind of catch up to itself sooner rather than later and see how it plays out through the rest of the year?
Yeah, for sure. I expect on the hog side, especially, only up 1.7 on the year right now. We'll go back towards year ago levels or drop below here pretty quickly as we go through the next several weeks. Likewise, on cattle, I expect something similar. We'll continue to drop a percentage, tenth of a percent or so each week as we go forward.
All right. Let's talk trade data. Another big month for trade, and especially when we take a look at beef exports.
Yeah, that's right. If we start on the beef side, we had about 52 million pounds more beef exported April of 21 relative to April of 2020. That's a 22% increase relative to a year ago. In value terms, we were up even stronger, up about 36% in terms of value terms. So those markets on the beef side, Japan was down in April relative to a year ago, but South Korea, China up strongly, Mexico also up. Those are the markets that helped us see the increase that we saw in April beef exports. On the pork side, we were up in total 14 million pounds relative to April of 2020. Despite the fact that we saw an 86 million pound drop to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also a modest drop into China. So higher pork exports driven in large part by a 55 million pound increase to Mexico. But we had a lot of other markets we typically don't put in the top 5 that accounted for 57 million pound increase in pork exports April of 21 relative to April of 20.
We talk about diversifying our markets a lot. How important is it that we're seeing an uptick in some of those smaller markets, maybe that aren't our typical top 5, top 6, top 10 markets?
Yeah, I high five the pork industry this month with those kind of monthly trade data numbers. It's exactly, in my book, the discussion that has to happen. We all know what happens when you depend on one country like China, which the pork industry did and to a large extent in 2020. That diversification that we're seeing in 2021 for me is a great sign that maybe there's more strength coming over the next 2, 3, 4 years than I would have anticipated earlier.
Supply and demand is the other big report that came out this week, and not a ton of big changes when it comes to the livestock side of things.
Yeah, that's right. So we, both have the current year that we're in, 2021, and information on calendar 22 from USDA in that report. Not a lot of big changes anywhere across the board. I'll say the one to me that stuck out was 110 million pound net export increase in 2021 for U.S. pork. That actually dropped per capita availability by 0.3 of a pound. So more positive news on the trade front there. USDA did increase the price for pork this month, the price for hogs, I should say, by $3 relative to where they were last month for this year. So even though we're sitting here in June, the $3 increase is a pretty good increase, and just tells you how strong these hog prices have been of late.
The one thing I want to talk about before we wrap up today, and just a side note, we had previewed last week that we talk retail prices and consumer sentiment as well this week, but we're going to table that discussion and spend some time focusing on it next week, since it's a pretty quiet week in terms of reports. But I do want to talk about the drought situation. We continue to see some pressure, significant drought pressure in parts of cattle country, in some serious parts of the Dakotas as well. And we've seen an uptick in cow-calf pairs being sold, and heifers as well. How much are we continuing to watch what goes on there? And even at rains at this point, can we see some relief for those producers?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. Now, if you look, so March 9th of this year, we had nearly 47% of the area in this country in a D1 or worse, D1 drought or worse. That has actually fallen to 43.7% as of June 1. However, that masks some very important things going on. I think that better has a lot to do with maybe a little bit of Western Kansas, Western Oklahoma, and Texas getting maybe a little better. But there's an area that's certainly a concern. And, if you look back at 2012, we ended up with about 52% of the, it's a weighted average of the top 30 beef cow states when I talk about this, but a little more than 52% in that D1 or greater drought designation. Now, you have to remember, Megan, that in 2012 happened in August, and much later in the year. We're sitting here right now at 37% in that same category, and we've just never been this dry this early. I think it's going to hurt hay supplies, pastures for the foreseeable future, even if we see abnormally high amounts of rain in some of these places. You talked about the Dakotas. I think that's a good place to say that even with some really good rains, it's not like it rains today and pastures are back to where they were tomorrow. It takes time for that to happen, and we're going to be in the middle of much hotter weather, and I think it's just going to be hard for that pasture and hay side to really recover too quickly. So I keep saying this is one we want to pay attention to, as much as you may be worried about where cattle prices are today. If this drought continues to follow through like it started, which is a big if, but if it does, we certainly could be in a much, much different place in terms of cattle supplies and ultimately cattle prices a couple of years down the road here.
And I know we've had that conversation a little bit, and it sounds like it's going to be one that you and I will continue to touch on week in and week out.
That's correct. I mean, I just feel bad for those folks right now who are in the middle of what's some pretty tough times. There are some good parts of the country in terms of weather that's going on, but you feel for those folks that are just having trouble making it on current pasture.
It's current pasture. You think about corn supplies, everything really is going to kind of tie into what's going on with this weather, and it's going to be a very interesting summer.
It sure will. I know we'll get to talk about this for much of the remainder of this year.
Scott, it's always great to see you. Next week we get to talk consumer demand on, which is always fun to get into that side a little bit, especially when we get to tie it back to why it's so important for us to monitor those on the producer side of things as well. So we look forward to that conversation.
Look forward to talking to you next week, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And for all of the great Brownfield podcasts, while you're on the road or in the cab of the tractor this summer, go to brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.